Welcome all. The UNESCO Brussels office is here at the European Parliament within the framework of the public hearing on education and training that will be hosted today by the Committee on Development. We are joined by three guests who will be speaking at this public hearing during the first panel. On my left, Mr. Bogdan Wenta, member of the European Parliament within the European People's Party and co-rapporteur of the revision of the European Consensus on Development. Welcome.
Hello.
On my right, Ms. Aida Liha Matejicek, Head of Unit Culture, Education and Health at DG DEVCO, the International Cooperation and Development Directorate of the European Commission. And Ms. Anna Cristina D'Addio, UNESCO Senior Policy Analyst for the Global Education Monitoring Report GEM. In 2015, the international community adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, known as SDGs. Major progress have been made towards achieving SDG4 and therefore ensuring inclusive and quality education for all and promoting lifelong learning, particularly for women and girls. According to the latest UNESCO GEM report, 264 million children and youth are today out of school, denied the right to education. Access to quality education is a globally shared responsibility. Increasing efforts and investments are needed from all actors involved. Ms. D'Addio, UNESCO is the leading UN agency for SDG4 education. The 2017-80 GEM report evaluates the role of accountability in education, analyzing how all relevant stakeholders can provide education more effectively, efficiently, and equitably. According to the report, accountability is a way of better achieving the SDG4 agenda. Ms. D'Addio, could you please explain to us what an accountable education system means? And in addition, perhaps, you could share some of the main findings of the GEM report with us?
Yes, certainly. Thanks a lot. So, as you just said, and I think it's important to say it again, that despite progress in education, many challenges remain to achieve our Sustainable Development Goal in education, SDG4. In fact, for example, we know that many children cannot read after several years of education in sub-Saharan Africa. Increasing pressure on examination is widening gender gap in China. There are issues of decentralization, which represent a challenge for underfunded rural school. In Pakistan and in Paraguay, for example, we know that there are issues related to low-quality private university. And more generally, there are also challenges related to access to education for refugees all over the world, which face a great risk of not having the opportunity of accessing education. So faced with these challenges, people want to know who can be held responsible, and policymakers try to find urgent solutions. And accountability very often tops the list. However, you can, and as you ask, you can wonder in practice what accountability means. And in some languages, accountability, the term accountability, is even contested and not translatable. And this reflects the fact that there are multiple approaches to help people to account for education processes globally. And accountability, in a nutshell, is the process for us by which someone can be held responsible, and it helps to know where responsibility are not met and help to fix the problems. However, it's important to say that accountability and the call for increased accountability has arisen because of trends, of some specific trends. First of all, the rapid expansion in education, which has called for tighter management. Second, the fact that there is some decentralization going on, and then there are increasing power and control at the local level, but still the central level needs to maintain the control and monitor and regulate, then there is also dissatisfaction for public education, which has meant that a kind of market-based approach to education has sprung, meaning that parents can choose the school to which to send their kids, and also there is an increase in dissemination of information that calls for increased transparency. Now, if accountability is a process, what we know is that the agenda for SDG4 requires really a multiplicity of actors' efforts that needs to fulfill shared responsibility. However, if responsibility needs to be shared, accountability is not. This means that single actors and institutions need to be held to account. And this also implies that there are some approaches to accountability that may be working in some context and be detrimental in others. So there are many examples and findings that I report that point, for example, to the need to use a formative and supportive approach to accountability, to education as accountability mechanism, and not punitive approaches that can increase marginalization and can have unintended features. And there are also other findings that show that, for example, it is important to build broad consensus among the different actors to develop credible education plans with clear lines of responsibility, with clear budget that needs to be queried and tracked, for example. I could go on forever, but I think I should stop at some point. So.
Thank you, very interesting point. In the past years, the European Union has approved several key policy proposals. In May 2017, the new Consensus on Development was released, setting the framework for development cooperation for the EU and its member states. Mr. Wenta, the European Parliament has been actively involved in the redefinition of the EU Consensus on Development. Fighting against poverty and hunger was outlined as a primary goal of EU development policy, a goal that can also be achieved through universal access to quality education. Mr. Wenta, have there been any major changes in the EU's approach to cooperation with developing countries in the field of education within the framework of the new consensus?
Thank you for this question. I think, first of all, the European consensus is structured about the Agenda 2030 and SDGs. I think we know last year in the United Nations this message, no one should be left behind. And I think education is connected in SDG number 4, which is now have a broader scope, because not only the primary education, we talk about the secondary and also high level. And for my personality, from my opinion, what is nowadays really important is technical and vocational training. I think this is this idea. This is first. And secondly, from DEVE Committee, we work really closely on the consensus with my colleagues, Mr. Neubers from S&D Group, to bring really good, strong declaration, especially in direction to the education. And I think that is done. Of course, the question will be about the implementation, and I mean also to be maybe have really good goals, really direct goals, but to be flexible in the time. We talk, for example, about Africa. Africa is a young continent. Every year, demographic growth is more and more young people. That means this our project, our funding, which we have maybe for tomorrow, maybe next week could be not enough. That is, in my opinion, is necessary to have a really flexible sometimes approach with really strictly good goals. That is why for example, here in our development DEVE Committee and Parliament, we support strongly not only Commissioner Stylianides, which proposed to bring also the education in the refugee camp and these areas from protracted conflicts, because over there you talk for the start here about the practically 270 million people. They're not attending the school, children. And that is the consequences. That is why we support these ideas from Commissioner Stylianides to take from the humanitarian budget some pocket to give these children possibility. Why? Because our experiences to visit different refugee camp, for example, in Africa, the young people come there, and sometimes after 10, 15 years, they still are there. that is important to organize something. If we will not help them, they are more easier to be radicalized, or can something happen? To give them chance, to give them maybe not really fantastic, but kind of future. I think this is really important. That is why we support Commissioner Stylianides, but also Commissioner Mimica and Avramopoulos in this area. I think here I can stop, and we are really. I think we are happy because if we talk the last 5 years or 8 years from 2010, this budget for education and, for example, humanitarian is jumping. We have this increasing of number of young people. On the one hand, increase of the humanitarian money, but on the other hand, education was a little behind. That is why we are really happy that, for example, for this year, the last year was 6%, that should be 8%. I think that's a really good idea, and I mean, from the DEVE Committee perspective, from all my colleagues, independent from which political group we represent, we are really happy.
Thank you. Allow me to move now to our other guest, Ms Matejicek. The EU support to education and training is placed at 3 levels: global, regional and bilateral programs, on the following main priorities. Firstly, inclusion and equity, concentrating on primary, secondary and higher education with a strong focus on gender. Secondly, education and training in crisis situations. Thirdly, improving quality of teaching and learning outcomes. And finally, strengthening the relevance of vocational education and training of young people and thus their employability. Ms Matejicek, how does DG DEVCO contribute to the achievement of SDG4?
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to be invited to this discussion, which the timing is more than urgent. Now, before I give a response to your question, I would just like to add on the number of challenges that the colleagues have raised. Firstly, we know 264 children out of schools, without access to schools. We need to, as MEP Wenta mentioned, we need to mention displaced people. So displaced children, displaced youth, which means we need to address more the education in emergencies and protracted crises. Today we know that the average duration of protracted crisis, meaning the time which young people spend in refugee camps in Africa, for example, are 19 years. Currently, we have 75 million children in emergencies and crises, out of which 30 million children approximately have no access to education. They are displaced. And then there is also a gender gap. We put a lot of focus on gender, on girls' education, but also boys' education. It's extremely important to look into this subject from the perspective of gender equity. So it's not always the girls. In some countries, it's really the boys. And then the quality of learning and teaching. Statistics show that by 2030, globally, we will lack 68 million teachers, especially in Africa, exactly because of demographic dividend that MEP Wenta mentioned. Now, on behalf of DG DEVCO, we, as you mentioned, work at global level, regional, and bilateral level. We currently support 49 partner countries in education through the budget of 3.5 billion euros for the 7-year period for the budget, including 400 million on VET, vocational education training programs. We also support, in terms of regional support, it's Erasmus Plus program. The main aim of Erasmus Plus, which is mostly known, of course, in the framework of the EU and our flagship, one of the most important initiatives, but it's very well known with our partner countries. We currently have 100 partner countries having their place in Erasmus+. Our budget is 1.45 billion for the 7-year period. And we, for example, as results, just to give you an idea, have already reached 66,000 credit mobilities, around 430 capacity building projects in higher education, so it's only higher education. And we have reached 1,730 joint master's programs, which means participants from partner countries. In terms of education in emergencies and protracted crises, DG DEVCO finances a program which supports education and quality of learning in refugee camps in the amount of 20 million euros. The program has just started for the 7 countries in Africa mostly. but also through Education Cannot Wait. So Commissioner Mimica is the member of the high-level steering group of the Education Cannot Wait, which the European Union supports with 16 million now at the start. Education Cannot Wait, as you might know, started only 2016, so it's still at its beginning, but it shows great results and achieving great synergies in the ground, which we think in terms of aid effectiveness is very important. And then at the level of global support, we support Global Partnership for Education. The EU is the biggest donor to Global Partnership for Education. Commissioner Mimica has just recently in Dakar, topped up our replenishment for 100 million euros, which makes it altogether 475 million euros for the 7-year period to GPE, to address the issue of quality of learning, quality of teaching, access to education, and many other gender, disabilities, and other vulnerable groups related projects. Now, on global initiatives, there are several more, but what we try to achieve is actually synergies among all existing initiatives that are currently either being developed or fully functional at the global level. For us, it's extremely important to take a look into aid effectiveness and really results-oriented and impact-oriented aspect of our work. Therefore, we are in very close dialogue with a number of initiatives and global platforms in order to exactly achieve this results-based effectiveness.
Thank you. I would like to ask another question to Mr. Wenta. Mr. Wenta, the Agenda 2030 embodies shared common values reflected in all key EU policy frameworks. In your opinion, how could the EU and its partners, such as UNESCO and other United Nations entities, strengthen their cooperation in order to increase the effectiveness of development actions and interventions in third countries?
Of course, first of all, if we talk about education, across education, we can really raise awareness of these people, these young people, especially if we talk about low-developed countries. This is first, as I think education is the most important tool to reach this goal. First of all, this awareness. And finally, could be possible that they will have a better situation than is surrounding. That is, I think, one of the goals that we really should as a better tools from our side, for all agencies, for UNESCO, of course from the Commission side, but as well from the Parliament and other NGOs or social organizations that can really help. I think here we should also include not only high school, universities, research initiative and innovative program that can give us more research also about the consequences, what is with education, what is without education, especially for the young generation. In my opinion, because I was a member just now in a delegation in Senegal, we could really follow 9 different projects, which is not related exactly to this area, but with Trust Fund, which is much more the control, awareness, refugees, irregular migration and so on. But it was good to see some project I really connected across the educational way for primary school, also on the regional level, and for example, region of Tambacounda in Senegal, which is one of the root causes for migration, for trafficking, human being trafficking. Well, it's a really complex issue. But across such initiative, then we can say this impact regionally, but also for refugees. And as well, for me, was really important for returnees. Education can raise this awareness, also to maybe no go to Europe, because probably you are also not really welcome here. And after that, you should pass these countries as Libya, and another, we know about which consequences can be. But these young people give us this back information. They have sometimes a lack of communication systems. They will maybe started their, for example, vocational technical training, and they still exist. What I will say, it's important to have this maybe global approach, but more invest locally, regionally. Nowadays we have we have really social media, we have internet, but exists also this face-to-face communication. In African countries, this is really good customs. We could this feedback, I think, and what is, in my opinion, really important for us, to talk about the long-term investigation. What we need stable countries maybe that give us time to invest, give us time to talk about the education, access, but also to have analyze this point of view. Maybe we should change, maybe we should add more, or maybe we should cut. If sometimes this, in my opinion. On the other hand, the cooperation between all what we see here today, I think they exist. It could be maybe better, but we should also to exchange much more information how to really push to achieve these goals. We will never, I think, in my opinion, we will never, if we talk about the migration, this issue is in Europe not really welcome such now. No? It's really difficult from a different member state, this position. But on the other hand, if we see how young generation is only an African continent, we should then work maybe across these goals, this point, which is education, cooperation in this area, to give these young people possibility, maybe to leave the country, maybe once again across educational awareness, discover regional possibility, small agriculture, and finally to have access to labour market locally, which I could see in Senegal in a vocational technical center, and most of this was girls, for example, which is interesting also, and young boys maybe less, but was really interesting to see this really strong approach for these young people from this region, not only Senegal, I use expression Senegal, but from neighborhood country, we talk Guinea-Bissau, from Mali and so far. It means that this impact is really enormous. Then we can feel, I think that is why it's necessary to have such strong cooperation, but work on this, change information about, and look for a better maybe possibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Following on from that, Ms. Matejicek, as you mentioned, we witness wide-ranging emergencies all around the world, from man-made crises to natural disasters. One of the emergencies that is the most difficult to address is the refugee crisis. How does the EU provide its support to least developed countries in education, and especially in education in protracted crisis? In emergency and protracted crisis.
Thank you. Yes, we are aware that every 1 in 4 children are in crisis, in situation of crisis or protracted crisis. We know that there are 75 million children and youth affected by crisis which need our education support. And we know that education receives only 2% of humanitarian aid. Now, what is important there is to, exactly as MEP Wenta mentioned, is to work together, but also to ensure a smooth and well-planned transition between humanitarian into development. One, when the crisis is gone, when this is resolved as an act of emergency. That's where development enters, and this is where we need long-term planning. This is where we need evidence-based work. And one of, for example, our best examples of our work in crisis and emergencies is our program on safe learning environments, for which we invested 20 million euros, as I mentioned, for 7 countries, which works actually to strengthen teaching and learning within the refugees, so within the host countries in refugee camps, also to ensure evidence-based work, which means for us to understand what works and what doesn't work in refugee camp. And then to refer back to the vocational education and training issue and the complexity of it. If we have children in refugee camps or generations of children, for example, and youth who have diplomas which are not recognized by a host country, then we haven't done anything. We need to work with partner countries together, dialoguing on the need to make those two equal, so that those people can get out, to put it that bluntly, out of a refugee camp and have their own earning and learning and employment, because that is a generator of employment. So these are, I think, most clear and most eclatant examples of our work in crisis and emergencies. But what I want to say is that we need to ensure a medium, long-term approach medium and long-term support to education in crisis, all with the aim for those children and youth to have future beyond those emergency kind of environments.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to close by asking you, Ms. D'Addio, a final question. The GEM report shows how the lack of clearly designed education plans by government can blur roles, leading to unfulfilled promises and unimplemented policies. The report concludes with concrete recommendations that could help build stronger and more accountable education systems. Is it possible to share some of these recommendations with us today?
Yes, certainly. Thanks for the question. Before answering the question, I would like, because I think it's relevant according to the discussion we have had until now, to say that our next Global Education Monitoring Report will be on migration, displacement and education, and many of the issues that have been discussed until now will be dealt within the report in relation to migrants, irregular and regular migrants, but also displaced internally and refugees, and the importance that education has and the challenges that education means in such context. So now, concerning your question about a recommendation to build sound accountability systems in education, I will start for something that I said before, that accountability implies multiple actors and may be built accountability mechanism in different ways. However, we know that even if there are multiple actors involved in the process, meaning not only governments, but parents, students, teachers, non-governmental organizations, civil society, and many others, the recommendation for each specific group is analyzed and set up in the report. In particular, however, what we know is that even if there are multiple actors that are implied in this process of accountability, the governments bear the primary duty to make right to education effective. And we know from the report that right to education is justiciable only in 55% of the countries that have been surveyed to this end. Another important point to build solid and sound accountability mechanism is to have credible education plans. As I said, with clear lines of responsibilities and a clear budget that can be queried and tracked. In addition, policies processes need to be built through very broad consultation involving many actors and stakeholders that are important to the education process. And we have example in the report concerning, for example, the consultation that has led to adoption of the national education plans in Brazil, involving 3.5 million of people, for example. And in addition, another important point is to allow for democratic voice to be expressed, to protect media freedom, and to set up instances where citizens can file their complaints. As I said before, and I need to highlight it, what is important is that accountability needs to be built in a way that is formative and supportive. This means that the idea of building and not blaming, which is very important. This is a very important recommendation to build accountability and to improve education systems. But also what is important is to set up laws and regulations that represent the backbone of a well-functioning state. And we know that in many countries they are often absent, and at the same time they need to be comprehensive and cover both private and public providers of education, which is often not the case. And however, I should conclude by saying something that is not the least important, probably is very important, most important, is that accountability needs resources, need capacity development, so needs finance. So what is important is to say that we need to be committed and to fund education, and we know that the benchmark either of the 4% of GDP to education, or 50% of devoting total government public expenditure to education has not been met by many countries. And finally, I would say that what is important also is to be transparent and to provide education that helps to increase quality and equity in education system. It's not education per se, it's not information per se, it's really something that helps to improve the systems.
Thank you. Yes,
so
of course.
To finalize, I fully agree with this position, because I think we are today all agree how important role play education in these low developed countries, and probably we should more focus show than this question. Frankly speaking, we talk about the improving living people conditions in these countries. Maybe, as I said, something also to cut this irregular migration, people trafficking, this modern slavery. I think the education is a fantastic tool. And this is also why I would inform you this our committee decided to draft this report on EU development assistance in the field of education. And I think that we can hope prepare a really strong message about the role of education, and also about the better partners and better work between us, between the partners, to have more on stronger efforts and better effect in these low developed countries in the area of education.
Thank you. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end. I would like to thank you all for your very interesting points and for joining us today. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the discussion.